welcome to another episode of a Wicked Parley. Tonight we're going to be talking about anxiety, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the things relating to how you treat it, what are some of the symptoms and what they kind of look like, and all that other good stuff. So hopefully you guys can look forward to a great, fun little episode. And with that, Rose, do you want to begin with a few of our definitions that we'll be covering on tonight's episode?
Yeah, we're moving quick now, aren't we?
Yeah, let's just jump on the ball. Let's get it going,
go.
huh? Yeah, let's go.
First and foremost, boom. The topic of the hour. Actually,
Indeed.
literally.
Yeah,
it's a literal statement.
Yeah, it literally is, and it's kind of important. I mean, anxiety. You know?
All right. So, anxiety. The apprehensive uneasiness or nervousness, usually over an impending or anticipated ill, a state of being anxious.
Yes, namely anticipated ill for this level of definition. So just understand when we discuss anxiety moving forward, it'll be mostly focused on that bit of the definition.
Hello, host.
Hello, host. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. On to the next one.
On to the next one.
Visualization.
Indeed.
Oh, there's my mouse.
This is. Hi, mouse.
So, hello. So, for today, we're going to be using this one. The act or process of interpreting in visual terms or of putting into visible form.
Yes. And definitely the interpreting and the visual term part of it is also really important. Sorry, I totally jumbled that up with I can speak today.
We're working on it.
Yeah, mainly when I talk about this is the idea of being able to visualize certain elements. I mean, it's very similar to the first bit of the definition, but I think being able to interpret it like certain levels of visual elements is the critical component of this particular definition.
I'm imagining it's a lot of visualization, not only for those who have anxiety, but for those who are going to help them treat it.
Exactly, yeah. Like a therapist needs to be able to picture and imagine what's going on to create the problem in the first place, and by using that particular therapist's imagination, they can kind of feel out the person and can somewhat sympathize with the person's feelings and situations. So.
Very helpful if, for one, you haven't exactly experienced the same type of anxiety either.
Yeah, I mean, anxiety is...
The word type of anxiety is kind of important too.
Yes, because anxiety does run the gamut. I mean, there's so many things involved with anxiety that, nailing one element down, very difficult.
All right. So, one of the terms we're going to be using later is mirroring.
Ah, yes.
So, mirroring is the behavior in which one person copies another person, usually while in social interaction with them. It may include miming gestures, movements, body language, muscle tensions, expressions, tones. You can read that entire list if you want. It's on the screen. I don't know if anybody wants me to read the entire thing.
I did, but like the key thing to get from this whole thing was that tempo, accent, eye movement, and tone. Body language can play a role, but that's about it when it comes to those things that matters most. And it has to do primarily with a technique that will help talk down someone who's experiencing anxiety, which we'll get into later in the episode.
All right. The next term is actually split up into two different ones.
Ooh,
We've got growth versus fixed mindsets. Very important.
Yes.
So, for a fixed mindset, right around here, for those who have a fixed mindset, people believe that their intelligence is fixed and static. For a person with a growth mindset, I missed the highlight.
That's all right.
In this mindset, people believe that intelligence and talents can be improved through effort and learning.
Yeah, this is...
So, do you think you could help me, for one, visualize this by giving me an example of, say, somebody with a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset?
Absolutely. This is critical when trying to deal with certain elements of anxiety, particularly from the professional side. If you were to come into a therapist, psychiatrist, counselor's office, and you're experiencing some level of anxiety, a person who has a fixed mindset will believe that whatever problem is giving them anxiety is likely never going to get any better because they think that it's going to perpetuate for their whole lives. Whether or not they experience anxiety for their whole lives is not really for debate, because obviously everyone's going to experience some form of pressure, stresses in their lives, which is going to create anxiety. But the thing is that a person with this particular mindset is going to be stubborn and think that their problem is forever going to be there. It's never going to get better. It's always going to be there. A person with a growth mindset is going to be someone who's more open to particular tools, strategies for how to cope with the anxiety, and is going to believe that if they put the effort in to learn these skills, that they'll be able to improve their situation and eventually be able to resolve or handle the anxiety that they feel and interact with throughout their day.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes me put it better into his perspective, because I look at those terms as like, what does that actually mean for our particular scenario?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, these two ideas, a fixed mindset and growth mindset, have been used throughout many points of psychological literature, ranging from, things like cultural psychology all the way on to biopsychology, to decide how, behaviors, how people perceive certain things. And so these are two kind of very important terms, but I think at least when discussing anxiety, it's important that we have at least some mindset of this, especially as we get into the later portions of the episode, when we deal with actually how therapists approach tackling some of the problems associated with anxiety.
All right. Is there anything else you want to add for any of the definitions we've used so far?
No, I think we're more or less pretty darn good.
Okay. So, real quickly, in order to give people time to digest these terms and how we're going to use them, we're going to give a little 2-minute break before we move on to the thick of it.
Yeah, and also this is your time to just basically dip if you don't want to watch. But hey, before you do dip, make sure you hit a like button so that way we get more people out there, all right?
Be sure to like and subscribe, please.
Yes, please. We need all the help we can get. And if you know people who are interested in psychological topics and just random shit that we talk about on the show, let them know about the show. We need all the subscribers and all the people out there so that way we can have truly fun, engaging conversations with wonderful viewers like you.
So, in 2 minutes, prepare to talk about what is anxiety. Not the formal definition, but overall.
All right.
We'll see you in a bit. What did you do?
I hit the mute button. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
And we're back, people.
Yeah. All right.
All
So,
right.
what's the first key element of anxiety that we're gonna tackle tonight?
Yeah, sure. Just give me one moment to also something up on the screen here
Okay.
for people to watch while we talk.
Hey, that's always fun. You guys get a little bit of Genshin Impact.
Yep, just a little bit. All right. So, the first question is, what is anxiety? What does it entail specifically? Like, we went through the formal definition already, so what does it entail? That sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Like, anxiety can be, first of all, it's a whole bunch of things. All right. So there's no one thing that kind of people can kind of pinpoint as this is anxiety. It's more like something you dread, something you don't feel particularly great at, maybe something you avoid, maybe something that makes you feel bad. But it's not like so severe that it's something else. Things that can be associated loosely with, although not wholly about fear, can play a huge role when it comes to certain elements of anxiety. The other thing that's kind of important also to keep in mind is that anxiety fluctuates and changes the way in which it is seen on the outside and felt internally when it comes to how the person is able to acknowledge themselves, acknowledge their environment, acknowledge their own emotions, and being able to relate to all those things independently as well as dependently. So like those particular levels of things are always fluctuating in individuals, and so no one example of anxiety is going to necessarily be the same. There's a lot of similarities, and so there's a lot of treatments that are given that are kind of like, here, try this to see. But anxiety's expression is very, very different, and it depends on each individual person.
Okay, so you're saying it could be like it could be triggered by one thing for some people, but for other people it could be triggered by a multitude of things?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, anxiety kind of like it hops all over the place. So one person who maybe feels pressure from a boss who's presented with a deadline, for instance, another person might get exposed to that particular deadline and be encouraged to get the job done rather than feeling anxiety. And so like the way in which a person perceives something and the way they feel about it is going to respond. They're going to respond completely differently. And so that right there, I think, is one of the key things to note when it comes to anxiety.
And I'm imagining for a singular person, the whole getting triggered by one thing versus getting triggered by multitude of things, even that can change over time, right?
Of course, yeah. As a person kind of like evolves and changes, the way in which a person experiences anxiety is going to fluctuate. You know, if you're, let's say, 21, 22, maybe you're in college, or you're in a professional setting, and you experience some form of anxiety, that anxiety is very real. And the treatment for that may, be a whole bunch of things. But you take that same person and you put them, 10, 20 years down the road, they're later in life. Maybe they have a marriage and family and kids and whatnot, or maybe they just have a bunch of other things going on. All of those particular circumstances and situations that would create anxiety are probably not going to be the same. They're the same person, but the things that make up that person and the things that person cares about are going to be different. So the anxiety is going to be that's going to be felt, shown, seen, needed to be dealt with is going to be completely different.
Gotcha. Speaking of which, so you mentioned pretty much anxiety is different depending on the person, and there's a lot of people.
Of course,
so,
yeah.
What are some of the ways that anxiety expresses itself? Like, is it similar to a panic attack? Is it something else? I mean, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. Anxiety definitely can come off like a panic attack. It's the difference between that is kind of subjective. There's kind of some details that I could get into in a little bit. Often anxiety is showcased by just kind of like, it starts off usually as a feeling that usually isn't being dealt with. And that feeling kind of then goes off the rails a little bit and kind of gets either suppressed, or it just is avoided altogether. And then the person is just all of a sudden felt with like this intense emotion, and that emotion can become from detracting from like reality. It can be suddenly feeling like the urge to cry. You could be in a public place and cry. Unfortunately, if that unsettles some people, that can happen. There's also a whole bunch of other things. Maybe a person starts to feel really angry about something. Anxiety has a whole bunch of ways of expressing itself because it's closely related to, our emotions. And so typically, there's also identity kind of rolled into that a little bit. And so you have all these sorts of different ways in which a person might go about expressing this. And so, I guess panic attacks is probably one of the most stereotypical kind of like things. But a panic attack is its own separate kind of thing, technically speaking. But I guess like the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack, which I think is kind of where you were going with this, it has to do with the severity and also the triggering of what was going on.
Speaking of which, just in case we do happen to trigger people, feel free to just pause the video, calm yourself down, and then if you feel up to it, continue the episode for later on.
Yeah, or not. That's something too.
That's also something.
I'm gonna try my absolute very best not to be offensive, but if anyone's like, "Hey, this is just kind of hitting a little too close to home," I understand someone being
Completely
like, "And dip," it's totally okay.
Make sure you take care of your health first and foremost.
Yeah, you, our precious viewers, are more important than the content of the show.
All right. I'll also put a warning up in the description, like first thing.
Okay, cool. That'll be helpful.
All right. So, obviously, sometimes anxiety, just at a first hear, it sounds like it could be detrimental, but how can somebody's anxiety affect their life? Can their life be affected in a positive way versus a negative way? Like, is there a positive way to use anxiety?
Well, anxiety can affect people's lives in a diverse set of ways. Okay, so there's no set good bad, and often anxiety is kind of neutral as it is anyways when someone conducts their lives. Typically, it's something that's added to their day. You could think of like a person's like, okay, I got a series of chores. Maybe I got to pick up kids. Maybe I got to go run this errand. Maybe I got to clean or fold these clothes.
So much stuff.
Right. And anxiety is just kind of like one of those extra burdens that sometimes people are throwing on top of their stuff. All right. That's typically like what it is. Now, I will say that there's plenty of exceptions to this that we can get into at a later time. But I think the ways in which positives, we'll start there. We'll go positive, then we'll go negative. Okay. So a person who experiences, let's say, anxiety, may do some things that would be kind of construed as potentially positive. And it's going to sound weird, but maybe withdrawing a little bit from certain social settings might be construed as a positive. Maybe not being the life of a party, for instance, and being a little bit more playing it safe because of anxiety, because they're fearful of maybe having a pressure or some sort of like situation, could potentially be problematic, and they identify that. And so sometimes anxiety can be used to kind of keep people in a safe kind of like position, and that I think is one of the ways in which a lot of people don't acknowledge anxiety. Sometimes anxiety can be a strength. If you experience anxiety and you have the ability to acknowledge it, then it means that you have the ability to adapt and grow, which kind of hints at the whole growth mindset thing that we defined earlier in the episode. And by being able to acknowledge that, that's kind of a huge positive. And so it kind of allows you to know your own limits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then when it comes to negatives, though, all right.
Oh dear.
Oh yes.
That doesn't sound like a good sign.
Yeah. Negatives also can be looked at the same way. You could imagine going to that same party and withdrawing, right? And you could have the negative interaction of not being able to get closer with maybe some of your colleagues, some of the people you work with, or some of the people you go to school with. And so you aren't able to make those critical relationships and form really positive interactions. Instead, you kind of become like this wallflower, and wallflowers don't get promoted. they don't get raises. They're the last thing anyone's thinking about. So I think that's ways in which anxiety can kind of work against you too, in the same situations that it could potentially be positive. So anxiety kind of is, because it's so linked to our emotions, so linked to our behavior, so linked to all these things, there's a lot of overlap, and so there's pros and cons with everything. So it's going to really come down to what the anxiety is, why you feel that anxiety, and how you go about dealing with it is going to dictate whether or not it lands in a positive or a negative side.
Okay.
And hello, Kyle. I saw that.
Yeah, we saw it. We were just in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah.
All right. Is it weird that thinking about anxiety makes me anxious? That's what Kyle says.
Oh, where do you? Oh, I see. No, I think that makes you human, and that's totally normal. I mean, honestly, like, anxiety can be triggering. Just talking about it can be triggering for almost anybody, because it makes you think of the thing that you're most anxious about by just hearing the word anxiety. Like right now, I'm thinking about, oh God, I have to clean out the trunk of my car. I've been delaying that for so long, and I'm a little anxious about like what I'm gonna find back there. It's like yeah, but then there's,
Hopefully not a turkey.
I mean, that's why go there?
I don't know, because you got turkeys.
That's a good point. All right, anyways, back on to the topic at hand here. So where were we exactly?
Yeah. So we talked about how anxiety can affect a person's life. So if it can affect their lives in either a positive or a negative way, how do people with anxiety, how are they treated? Like, is it a more physical treatment, emotional treatment, cognitive treatment? I'm imagining it depends on the person first and foremost.
So, like, let me make sure I understand this exactly. Are you asking, like, when anxiety is identified and a person seeks professional help, are you asking, is a counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist going to treat it with a physical approach, emotional approach, or some sort of cognitive approach?
Yeah, is it a physical treatment, emotional treatment, or cognitive treatment?
Okay. Yeah, honestly, when it comes down to that, it's going to be incredibly subjective. The first thing that a therapist will likely do, and I would imagine psychiatrist, counselor would do, is they would first attempt to identify the reason for the anxiety in the first place. They're not even going to start to touch the anxiety. They're going to understand the reason why the anxiety is there in the first place. So they're going to do a whole bunch of things that we'll get into in a little bit later when it comes to treatment, specific treatments of anxiety. But the general gist of it is that they're going to first identify what's causing it. And then, depending upon the circumstance or the situation, they're going to lean towards either a cognitive, emotional, or a physical approach. And some of the examples I can kind of give you are, let's say, like a person is working in a cubicle and they are feeling very anxious about deadlines. You know, maybe they work as a newspaper reporter, or maybe some sort of like, computer tech related job, and so they don't really get to outside all that much. They're very indoors, and these sorts of environments breed a whole variety of anxieties that are linked to the workplace. One of the treatments that a counselor, therapist, psychiatrist might do is they might suggest that when you're beginning to feel anxious, go for a walk outside. Go find a trail for like 15-20 minutes and just go for a walk. And that way you are out of that space. You are, so you're giving yourself some time to distance yourself from the source of the problem, right? Yeah. And at the same time, you're also giving yourself the opportunity to think about what's going on. Think about things that are in your life, and giving you almost, I wouldn't say necessarily a meditative experience, but some sort of like internal dialogue that can be really helpful at working through problems. Now, a therapist, or etc., right, is going to deal with a emotional instance of anxiety, very likely by identifying traumas, and particularly traumas that happen to individuals early in childhood, because typically those kinds of things are the things that breed anxieties that would require an emotional treatment. This is things like fear of abandonment, and like a person being anxious about maybe their partner leaving them. That anxiety that might come from that particular type of thing might be, really prevalent in certain circumstances, and it might be because that person doesn't have the ability to connect with their emotions in a way that they can relate to. They can't really explain how they feel. Maybe they don't really understand why they feel certain things, and so by getting in touch with that side, they might be able to overcome those kinds of problems and be able to start to work on the things that are making them anxious, and maybe give them some tools to, curb that anxiety a little bit. Now, the most common that I'm aware of when it comes to treating anxiety is actually going to fall more on the cognitive side, and that's usually through like psychotherapy, talk-based therapy. And that's because, typically speaking, most anxieties are bred because they're not being acknowledged. They're being suppressed, they're being ignored, and so by getting an opportunity to discuss these particular things, you really get a chance to really get through them, work through them, acknowledge them. And most people feel like a huge weight is lifted off their shoulder when they're given the opportunity to express those particular things. And so I personally, I've had anxieties before. I've seen therapists before. And I can tell you strongly that, yes, that really did happen to me. That's how I felt. Now, just because that happened to me does not mean it will happen to everybody. So I will say that too.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, everyone's different. Everyone's going to have different situations. But I can tell you that was my experience with that particular thing. And I definitely think that, I said that's the most common because I've talked to a lot of people and they've said that's kind of like the most common thing. It's not because, I related it. Just heads up. But yeah.
So, yeah. What's up?
Oh, no, I just want to say this, there are certain elements that are tied to anxiety that also don't fit necessarily into those three particular terms that we outlined. It's kind of also important to understand. And another huge piece of anxiety that is dealt with that is not in those three particular settings actually comes from religion. A lot of people practice their faiths, and through the practice of their faiths and through their prayers, they're able to alleviate or treat anxiety as well. So I felt like that was a caveat that we didn't really get to touch about in the setup for this episode that I thought was very important to discuss. So.
Okay. Well, it's good that you mentioned it then.
Yeah.
Even if only real briefly, and I'm sure if people want to ask about it in more detail, they can email the show.
Yeah, and if anyone wants
just scrolling at the little bottom there.
Yeah, if anyone has any particular questions about this, go ahead and throw it in the chat. If we have time before break, we'll get to it. But definitely by the end of the episode, we will address any and all questions that are asked. So go for it. Feel free to ask any questions about any of the things that are getting discussed. And if you aren't here for the live broadcast, then shoot us an email at awickedparley@gmail.com, where I will 100% respond to your questions, and you will get a thoughtful answer, not some bullshit. So do that if you want.
All right. So actually, speaking of break, we've got one more thing before we go on break.
Oh.
It might be a real quick thing. I don't know. So obviously, depending on the person, you're going to have different types of anxieties. How long might it take for that person to either recover from that anxiety or be able to control it rather than being overcome by it?
Okay. So I'm going to say this. This is going to be something that's repeated many times. And that is, it is so subjective. All right.
Yeah,
but,
it really is.
But I will say this. There is a kind of like a caveat you can take to this. Most people don't have insurance that will pay for endless hours of therapy for anxiety. So you might only get 8-16 hours before it starts just coming straight out of your pocket 100%. And so therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists typically build treatment plans around those particular things because they know that they only have so much time to work with somebody before they can't. And so I would say is that most people who begin those particular practices, obviously the first couple of sessions is a get to know each other, get to know some of the problems. But towards the last one or two sessions, you're going to typically see people be given the tools, to work through whatever their problems are. They're going to really get to a point where they're safe. And I've seen some extraordinary efforts put forth on the part of therapists to guarantee that those particular things are met. Sometimes therapists will do things for free. Sometimes therapists will just ask so many questions about so many things you wouldn't even think are interconnected to get to the truth, just so that way that person can truly get the help they need. There are some truly wonderful people out there who are committed to people being happy, being healthy. And so
it's not just about the paycheck, it's about helping people. Exactly.
Yeah. And so when it comes to 100% recovery, for those who are like, I want the cure-all, I'm going to break this to you. There isn't one. Anxiety is something that people deal with throughout their entire lives. But the good side is that there are a lot of people out there who care. And there are a lot of people who would say that particular elements of treatment can be helpful and repurposed to solve certain issues that people experience over the course of their lives. So, I would say there's information out there for a lot of things. It wouldn't surprise me if you're experiencing anxiety, that there's a helpful book or something that someone can teach you that can help alleviate some of the symptoms you're experiencing. With that, I think we're going to be going to our next break. So I guess we'll see you guys all in about 2 minutes.
We'll see you then. The next section, which will be on the cue card, we're going to talk about how to treat anxiety. So, get some snacks, take a break, calm yourself down if need be, and we'll maybe see you again in 2 minutes.
Crawl into a Snuggie.
Crawl into a Snuggie, yes.
We're back from break. If you wouldn't mind throwing up the questions again.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool.
So we actually got one before the break ended that we didn't get to ahead of time. This one was actually before the break. So before I say anything, first and foremost, again, we're talking about anxiety, which can get pretty triggering for quite a number of people. So if you start getting anxious about it to the point of detriment, feel free to just click off the episode because your health is way more important.
Yes, your health is far more important. But before you just straight up just bail, just make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. But also make sure that, if you want to endure the discussion, grab a puppy, grab a kitten, sit down, pet with some fluff, That's
Fluffy therapy is a thing.
Fluffy therapy is very important. Anyways, so the question that was brought forth, I believe, by Kyle was, I wonder if religion can cause anxiety, specifically religions that believe in a judgmental God. Absolutely, Kyle. 100% anxiety can be induced by religion just as much as it can be solved. And the truth is that, as we discussed a little bit before, anxiety can be felt, triggered by just about anything in the world. And even things that don't even exist in the world, such as God. I'm sorry, I'm not an atheist. I swear.
Ay, caramba.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, you're digging yourself more.
Yeah, it's fine. But when it comes to certain things, absolutely, anxiety can be felt, and yeah, it can cause all sorts of things. But I would just say that with anything, it is entirely subjective on the individual, and so keep that in mind. But yes. And also, Kyle, grabbing puppies is very important. All right.
All right. Ready to go?
Yeah, let's get into the next part of the topics.
So, when it comes to treating anxiety, how do therapists treat or deal with it? Like, what are some different methods to help people with anxiety?
Okay. Yeah, so the first thing kind of I alluded to when it came to our previous section was that therapists try to identify all the reasons why a person would experience anxiety in the first place. And the way they do this is they ask a series of questions, obviously by the person that they're coming in contact with. They might ask for medical records when it comes to their background. They may ask friends and family questions relating to the individual and some of the things that they may or may not be doing in their lives. They may even ask for the medical records of family members, particularly parents and grandparents. And I mean, some people just they will look under every single rock to try and figure out what's going on when it comes to anxiety.
How much paperwork do they have to go through to get access to all that?
A lot. So like virtually every single therapist / counselor is going to have to get some sort of paper document saying that the client has to sign saying that yes, you have the ability to look at my medical records. And so from those particular things, documentation is ever so very important. Paperwork is super annoying to some, but also critical when it comes to dealing with problems in life. And so take the good with the bad. But yeah, so that kind of is the first starting point when it comes to most levels of treatment. The next level is once they've been able to identify the particular source of why you might be feeling the anxiety, then they're going to start to build kind of like off of it by creating a dialogue very often, by how to change mindsets of sorts. Especially if a person comes into essentially a therapist's office with a fixed mindset where they're very stubbornly believing that their anxiety will always be there, they will never be able to change. They will learn to adapt, start to become more of a growth mindset kind of approach by giving them subtle, I wouldn't say manipulations, but like nudges in a more positive direction, and finding different ways to relate to an individual. One of the key things that therapists often do is they do this thing called mirroring, especially when in the event of a person having anxiety, because the last thing that a therapist really wants to do when you're affected by anxiety is to be this giant, squashy voice that goes, "So, what's going on with your problem? Oh, that's unfortunate." You don't want that. What you want is someone to be able to kind of relate to you, acknowledge what's going on and meet you at your level. So they're going to talk to you in the same tone of voice. They're going to gesture to you in the same way. They're going to do all the things they possibly can so that way you have the ability to confront yourself and be able to confront the anxiety that you're feeling. Because if you can confront it, then you can identify it. If you identify it and confront it, then you can actually work past it. You can learn the skills necessary to actually respond to it and actually have positive outcomes. And if you feel that pressure, you feel that problem creep up, you're not just going to just push it aside. You're going to acknowledge it. You're going to let it know it's there, and you're going to deal with it.
Okay.
And so,
it's nice to know how far people will go to help others.
I mean,
There's a lot, yeah.
I would say I've seen some crazy things by some therapists.
That's more in depth than I would have thought.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, a lot of people just assume that therapists kind of just sit there and they listen to people's problems and then they just kind of take their paycheck and they go home for the day. But that's really not what goes on at all.
That would be a bad therapist, for one.
Oh, I would be a unemployed therapist very fast.
Yeah.
The vast majority of therapy anyways is research. I mean, the hour-long session you might do with a single individual is something that is 2% of their job. Most of the time they're doing a lot of the legwork. They're tracking down medical files, they're doing research on symptoms, things like that.
So if that's if all of that's happening behind the scenes and whatnot, are there ways to predict an anxiety attack and be able to prevent it, or is that a little more difficult depending? Okay, yeah, it depends on the person, but
So, unfortunately, I'm not aware of any particular practice or method to detect anxiety before it happens in the first instance. Unfortunately, it usually happens suddenly. It usually is very difficult to convey to other people until after the initial anxiety attack has been felt and seen. And so what could be said is the best case scenario is that after the first attack, you can begin to identify some of the things that happened right before, and you can start to let your close friends and family know that this is something that you've experienced, this is something that's going on right now, and that if you see it, you can kind of like try and help me. And then maybe like as a community, as a friends and family, can kind of like together support the individual and help them work through some of these problems. But unfortunately, for at least the first instance of it, it doesn't seem like there's a clear-cut way to deal with that. But I will say this: the tactics and techniques that a person would likely incorporate when dealing with certain approaches like that a therapist would use to deal with anxiety can also be mimicked and used outside of therapy by not therapists as well, especially mirroring. Like if you can mirror someone, you can talk them down from a particularly agitated or extreme state. It can really benefit them because some of the harm that can be felt by anxiety can be minimalized to some extent and reduced in ways that are noticeable by the person who's experiencing it after the fact.
Okay.
And so making sure that you do the things like not talking over them, meeting them at their level, like, feel them out, and kind of match what they're doing. You even come down to their eye level, like if there's someone who retracts and curls into a ball and wants to get away, you don't
loom over them.
You don't loom over them. You don't disappear on them. You come down to their level. You speak at the same volume. You use maybe some of the same gestures, some of the same slang, whatever it takes for them to be able to bridge that gap and still feel like it's okay to communicate, because you might be their only lifeline. And so it's really important that you do those particular things. So.
Yeah, that kind of actually goes into the next question I had, like when an anxiety attack happens, how do they go about helping? So is there anything else that you want to add on top of that? Or
there's a ton of things that people can do. So friends and family members that know that, like, let's say like you have a brother or a sister or a mother or father or a friend that is experiencing anxiety, you can do research about anxiety. You can ask the person experiencing anxiety questions about like what their symptoms are like, what they're feeling, what are some of their triggers, and really, be like, learn about it, what's going on, and then learn how to maybe not be a part of that trigger. Not say certain things that cause the anxiety that they're feeling, and then also learn some skills of your own to be able to assist them when they're going through those particular things, like the skill I just mentioned.
It sounds like just being informed is quite helpful.
Yeah, 100%. An informed person is a extremely helpful person.
Okay. Yeah, don't be part of the problem, be helpful.
Yeah, don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution.
Yeah, I like that. I like that phrase a little too much. Alright, so that's how we go about treating it and whatnot. This section might have been better before the break, but don't want to make it too long. So, this is how you can help people with anxiety. Outside of that, how does anxiety affect people themselves? For instance, how might anxiety affect the relationship that a person has with other people?
Okay. Well, obviously anxiety can affect people in a whole variety of ways, as we've kind of like talked about. I think one of the main things that anxiety does is that if you're, like, say, in a relationship with someone and the person's experiencing anxiety and you aren't aware of that, and you're not like doing things that are like trying to help out that situation, then that relationship can come to an end pretty quick because you're not being able to convey what's going on and you're not being receptive to what's going on. Other ways anxiety can also happen, like, can kind of impact people's lives, is people can lose their job. I mean, can you imagine if you have an anxiety attack, you don't tell your boss what's going on, but you just disappear to the bathroom for 30 minutes to an hour? I mean, if that happened enough times, you could lose your job over it. So I think,
Unfortunately.
yes. So there's lots of ways in which relationships, both, friends, family, romantic, workplace, can be impacted by this. And I think a lot of it has to do with being able to communicate what's going on, having people be receptive and understanding to what you're conveying and communicating, and having reasonable actions and responses to what's going on. I also strongly encourage help. If you're experiencing anxiety and it's coming at the cost of your personal life, the relationships in your life, you need to go see professional help. Go see a therapist. Go make an appointment with a counselor. If you're a college student, most college campuses in the United States, particularly at least in California, that I can definitively say have a therapist on campus that you can make an appointment with, and typically your tuition paid for it. So it's a service that you are already paying for, you may not even be using. So use it if you need it.
Better to take care of your health now than later.
Yeah, because you don't want to sit on this stuff. I mean, some anxiety, can affect your health in huge ways. I mean, people have had heart palpitations. People have had heart attacks.
Yeah.
There's some evidence to suggest that cancer can form by having large, copious amounts of anxiety and stress in your life.
Terrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are all things that, you should definitely be aware of and take seriously. Because, too many people take anxiety and go, you know what? It's not a problem. I'm just going to sweep it under the rug. I'll get to it when I can, whatever, yada, yada, yada. It's just stress or just this thing that's not a big deal. And it really is. And it should be taken seriously. And in the media needs to do a better job about portraying anxiety. and also not making it such a stigma. Be like, oh, he's just anxious,
Don't romanticize it.
Yeah, don't romanticize it. Looking at you, Twilight.
All right, before I lose my mind laughing on that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just little things, again, add up to a big thing, and sometimes that big thing is not something you ever want.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm guessing those are some ways of affecting your daily routine? Especially with the work example, at least.
Yes. I mean, I mean, can you imagine let's take the work situation for a second. Let's say
Sure.
you need to pick up your kids from school and you have an anxiety attack in the car while you're waiting for your kids to come into the car.
Oh boy.
I don't know if you've seen those lines around schools with all these freaking cars, but
I'm just imagining in the car.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that. Yeah, you're you want to have a freak out in the middle of the road? And it's I'm not so sure you want to do that. So
Not only for your safety, but for the safety of those around you, too.
Exactly, yeah. So those are all things that are important.
Very much so. So, don't wait around if it's starting to get bigger than you can handle.
Yeah, definitely.
Get a handle on it now before it gets too big for your britches.
And seek professional help if you need it. It's not a bad thing. It really isn't.
If anything, going to get help to control it is more of a plus because you realized that you have something you want to improve.
Yeah, and if you see someone who's feeling anxious and they're not willing to go to a therapist, talk to them. And at least, be someone who can be supportive to them. So,
just taking a look at do you see the latest question?
I do see the latest question. Are we done with this particular section?
I believe so.
Okay.
So do you want to handle this one right before our break? Our last break?
Sure. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
All right. So, last question before the break. Can you talk about the difference between having anxiety and general anxiety disorder?
Sure. So the difference between anxiety and general anxiety disorder has to do with the severity of the symptoms. In order for a problem to be a disorder, so in order to have GAD, as it's commonly referred to, you have to be experiencing severe symptoms of anxiety for, I believe, 2 to 4 weeks, at least, consistently, and it has to impair your ability to live, meaning you can't go to work, you can't go shopping, it's stopping everything about what you're doing in your day-to-day routine in life, and it's just eating up huge portions of your time. That is GAD in a nutshell. I mean, and the difference obviously is that anxiety, general anxiety, isn't necessarily to the point where it's so detrimental that you can't conduct the necessary activities in your life. It's just kind of like I said, explained before, it's like an extra burden that's going on in your life. So in order for it to take on to an actual disorder, it has to be a severe impairment. And hopefully that's the gist. So hopefully that answered the question. Yeah. So we'll be going to our last break. We'll see you in 2 minutes.
Yep. See you then.
All right, so we're back. So we got a few more minutes left in the show. Hopefully people have had a couple questions that maybe that's popped up. If anyone wants to ask anything, let's open the floor to that a little bit. So
my voice just cracked. Frank.
So
Okay.
yeah, so if we have any questions, let's go ahead and take a look.
Not anything during the break. Maybe later in a bit.
Okay.
So, how about we get into the next subject? As the cue card mentioned, we're gonna be talking about using anxiety to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a weird sentence out of my mouth. To be honest, never thought I'd say anything like that.
Okay.
But, so, alright, so real quick. How can someone use their anxiety to better themselves?
Honestly, one of the interesting things when it comes to anxiety is that sometimes anxiety can showcase what's really going on and can begin at least a starting point for an internal dialogue to be able to identify what you need, what you want, what you're about in life. Something that's very important that's not always seen or discussed.
Like, what type of things?
So let's say, for instance, a person is just going about their lives and they have a lot of pressure and they don't understand why. Okay. And then that pressure turns into some sort of anxiety, maybe even going as far as an anxiety attack about the pressure they're experiencing, right? Mm-hmm. And so they go see a professional. They see a therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, etc., right? And through those interactions with that professional, they are able to get a handle on that particular anxiety. Well, in addition to being able to get a handle on that particular anxiety, it allowed them to get the opportunity for some introspection and to be able to identify a little bit with who they are as a person. Some people go through their entire lives and go, I am just this person who does this work, or I'm just a student, or I'm just a husband, or I'm just a wife. And they don't really have that, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. Like spark, which is in everybody. And so especially when it comes to people who experience an emotional trauma early in their childhood and they suppress a lot of their feelings and emotions, these particular patterns play out in ways where they suppress not just those particular feelings, but just they suppress their identity. And so when they go to seek help for dealing with the anxiety, they're able to get an opportunity to experience and express who they are as individuals, which can be one of the many positives that's associated with anxiety, which is one of the reasons why I say that anxiety isn't necessarily a bad thing. And it's something that truly everyone has anyways. And so, it's one of those things. It's an unpleasant thing that everyone has to deal with in life. Like men have to shave. I mean, I have to shave. I don't find it particularly pleasant to have to shave, but I have to shave. Or at least, I should. But it's something you have to deal with in your life pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. And I think anxiety is kind of one of those things. But just because it's something that has to be unpleasant doesn't mean you can't enjoy something. So for instance, when I eventually shave later on tonight or tomorrow, I will probably be listening and dancing to some music while I do that. So that way I'm having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Make something
small inconveniences, join them up with something you like, so it's better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like me working on homework.
Hey, yeah, you have a homework buddy, so you got
mm-hmm.
that going.
Yep. So find little ways to make these inconvenient moments happier.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work, huh? Using anxiety to point out what's going on in your life and then improving it based off of that, because if you don't realize something's wrong to begin with, you can't exactly go about fixing it, can you?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of one of the trends that kind of goes across the board whenever you experience a problem. A lot of people want to point out the fact that it sucks to have problems, but if you didn't have problems, you wouldn't really know that life is good. So, it's like that whole saying, do you look at life like a glass half full or half empty?
I thought you hated that.
I mean, I do, but I think it kind of works in some circumstances, and this is one of them.
Oh, I like host's comment.
Oh yeah? What's host say?
Trick the anxiety to work for you.
Exactly. Because at the end
Sounds
of the...
like reverse psychology.
Well, I mean, we are talking about a psychological subject. So, hey, there we go, folks. We got the little in there, Okay, anyways, so...
Oh, boom. Anyway.
I know, right? Oh my gosh. So back to the thought at hand here. When it comes to certain things, make things that suck work for you, because then they will suck less. That is the rule of thumb when it comes to all things, and anxiety should be no different.
Slowly make things better, and then it won't be as bad.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't control necessarily the way you feel about something when you're first presented something, but you do have the ability to control it once you're aware of it. So
you also have the ability to react to it appropriately.
I would say reaction to stimuli is subjective, and I think that some people react... Okay, everyone reacts to everything a little bit differently, and so gauging an initial reaction to something is not necessarily indicative of temperament and overall ability to cope with certain things.
But for second and third and fourth happening.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, 100%.
So, oh my.
I'm a glass is bull type of guy. I don't even get that. I'll be honest with you, host. I have no idea what you mean by that. All I can imagine right now is one giant glass bowl, like a bowl made of glass, and then yeah.
All right. Well, what do you feel about Kyle's last comment?
My anxiety bubble tries to help, but all it does is make a list of things I can't do anything about. That's the comment you want me to respond to?
I mean, I'm what do you think of it?
I think that's probably not the greatest way to look at anxiety. I think that it promotes a negative space that only builds anxiety. I would say that if you really feel that way, the best thing you could probably do is attempt to take at least one thing. I mean, I'm not going to say do everything on your list, but I would say at least take one thing on your list and try and make it work for you rather than work against you. And that way you can...
one at a time instead of looking at the entire list.
Yeah, and then that way eventually you can get through that list a little bit, and instead of having a bubble of anxiety, it's more like a small list of things that you're anxious about, but you don't have to feel it all the time. You can make it not be the huge weight that it probably feels on you right now.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes things are more readily fixable if you break it down.
Yeah. And so, I just want to end this episode by more or less saying that anxiety is everything to everyone and can be anything. And that you don't be fearful of what anxiety is likely to make you sense, feel, or interact with. Make the anxiety that you sense, feel, and interact with be your strength, if you can. Make it work for you. Have positive outcomes. And if you have a problem, if you see something that's an issue, and you're like, I can't do this by myself, go get help. There's no harm in that at all. So I really encourage that. And if you see someone who is anxious, try and help them out. Everyone needs a rock. Be their rock.
Be the person you aspire to be.
Exactly. And with that, I wish you all a great night. It's been a great episode. We'll see you all in the next one. Later, everybody.